because it appears that they are, but this like, to me, there seems to be this underlying theme of paranoia about like, it's not on her, it's on someone else. And I don't know if that speaks to an underlying personality disorder or just a facet of how she reacts with the world.
Can you give an example of the behavior that you've identified in terms of not her, someone else from this episode?
Well, the one that's in my brain is from the frozen yogurt. That's I'm trying to piece her together, but like it's not her, it's the frozen yogurt's fault that she gained weight or some external force's fault.
And let me actually pause you there because you just probably unknowingly so gave us a clinical term. So from the general perspective of someone who persistently fails to take responsibility or accountability, largely because they believe that no matter what they do, likely doesn't matter. In psychology, what does that refer to as?
External locus of control.
Yeah, right. So that's the external locus of control. And an external locus is an independent risk factor for depression and anxiety. Right? So these are the seminal experiments by Bandura and Harlow and others, where in one case, rats were put into a cage and provided a mild electrical stimulus. And then the control group, similar, where if the rats push the lever, they can turn the electricity off. Those rats in that, I guess it would be the experimental group, were perfectly fine. They ate and they slept. No change in their diurnal sleep pattern. They mated and had little rat babies. But it was the rats in the other group that had the same lever, but when they pressed it, it only turned the electric shock off some of the time. And the electric shock sometimes was turned off without pressing the lever. Those rats understood that they had no control over their environment. They adopted learned helplessness. And as a result, stopped eating, stopped sleeping, and stopped having sex, and they died. Right. So learned helplessness, albeit born from animal studies, or at least discovered through animal studies, is an independent risk factor for the depressive disorders and the anxiety disorders. The opposite is also true. When an individual has an internal locus, when they understand that no matter what happens, they've played a role in it and therefore have some control over their environment and or destiny, etc. That is a protective factor. So in Elaine's case, if we see any signs of depressive illness or an anxiety disorder, it may have its root, it may have its etiology in learned helplessness. That is, that external locus of control. In developing, let's say this develops into a personality disorder. Let's say that this results in character traits that become enduring and pervasive, aka personality, and therefore, to the extent that it's clinically significant, a personality disorder. What personality disorder or disorders do you think may Elaine be at highest risk for?
Paranoid?
She could, yeah, and we've seen some of that, right, in terms of her always blaming others or yogurts and things.
Yeah.
The other two that would be incredibly high on the list, you have a guess? Borderline is possible. Dependence very high risk here, and as is avoidant, right? The other cluster C, personality. Right, those are the two that come to mind that we'd have to be careful of and make sure that as a clinician we don't miss in terms of evaluation if hypothetically Elaine were to present to a clinical setting with these very traits resulting in clinically significant distress or impairment. Right. The individual, for example, who was diagnosed with a dependent personality disorder needs every next step validated and reassured. So they're very hesitant to take on tasks without reassurance. And that includes interpersonal relationships and establishing those meaningful relationships, which, by the way, Elaine seems to demonstrate. across episodes and across seasons. And the avoidant personality is the idea individuals have is due to feeling socially inept and therefore socially inhibited, that is just not worth the risk because of the shame that might result with rejection or through rejection. Right? It is better to never have loved at all than to have loved and lost. Right. So that's the avoidant personality. Oh, by the way, just so we have a full discussion on cluster C personalities, what's the remaining personality disorder from cluster C that we haven't mentioned? Avoidant we mentioned. Possessive compulsive personality. Sorry. So that fills the three for cluster C. Any other observations with Elaine in this episode?
When she goes to the nail salon, right, and she suspects that they're like making fun of her in the room, like she comes back, which is like, because we were just talking about avoidant personality and things like that. Like I would suspect, like I would have thought that if she suspected they were making fun of her or talking about her, like she would just leave and never go back to the nail salon.
But did you see the nails?
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
There was a motivation as to why to return, and the other motivation may be actually something that is internal or subconscious, and that is the need to know.
Yeah.
The need to know. So again, taking the extra step, albeit how devious and perhaps even unethical it might be, she had to go back and find out, and that's the role of Frank here.
And I think point, like, I would say maybe not avoidant also, because she does buy them also to see that rich child. And I feel like if you were avoidant, if you would take the risk and invite all these people to come to the show with you. If you have that personality disorder.
Yeah, I'm not so sure that Elaine truly rules in for avoidant personality. Certainly her behaviors allow for discussion, but like any patient encounter and discussing a case formulation, there are several diagnoses that we have to consider as clinicians that wind up in the other category, that is the no column. And I think for Elaine, avoidant personality disorder is probably going to go in that direction.
Would there be more evidence towards the dependent that she needs the validation? She buys them, she brings them back, or she goes back, she buys new tickets, like she keeps trying to re-enter the nail salon.
Yeah.
Like, sort of a physical and emotional space.
It could be, and we see that type of behavior in Elaine again across episodes. At least dependent personality traits, rule out dependent personality disorder. And yes, her traits are maladaptive and do result in clinically significant distress. And definitely they impair meaningful interpersonal relationships. Anybody here who has watched Seinfeld have an idea of where the etiology of this might result? So he's in only 2 or 3 episodes, but we see her father very briefly. And it's fairly clear that there is a very distant, emotionally distant relationship between father and daughter, and her need. And I think she even refers to him or describes him as intimidating. And one episode that he may not actually appear in, she mentions that he's an alcoholic. These dependent traits might actually result from that distance created because of his abusing alcohol when she was at a very young age, and what that meant in terms of, again, bonding. Right? The clinical term you may hear described in terms of these traits enduring due to this distant relationship, an emotionally distant relationship between child and someone with substance use disorder, is an adult child of an alcoholic, or ACOA. It's a clinical term you hear in addiction medicine sometimes, ACOA. And Elaine, I think, demonstrates aspects of ACOA. Already half past or quarter past the hour. Any other observations with Elaine or any other characters you care to discuss this morning? Talking about the understudy.
I always love an opportunity to talk about Frank. And so he has this, what comes across as a phobia of taking off his shoes. But I think when you kind of hammer it down, it's less about actually taking off his shoes and more the social embarrassment of having smelly feet once he takes off his shoes. So it might like fall more under like a social phobia and then like a subtype of like having like being embarrassed by his smelly feet rather than like just a phobia of taking off.
I wonder if that would be situational type. We briefly talked about this yesterday. The American Psychiatric Association has simplified the classification of specific phobia. And this might be a discussion of simple phobia versus social anxiety disorder, otherwise known as social phobia. So you have two diagnoses here in the differential. Social anxiety disorder, otherwise known as social phobia, versus specific phobia, of which there are 4 subtypes. One of them being situational type. So I think that's the discussion here. Are we provided a hint as to the etiology of this?
I can't remember if there was like an instance where he's cut his shoes and like, or like, I think he just says that he's self-conscious of his smelly feet.
Mhm. I don't recall. Could be. Certainly a question the clinician would ask.
But I don't think he ever says something like, oh, when I was a kid.
This
like,
happened.
What's that? Right.
Is that right? I mean, obviously, this is exactly where the psychiatrist would delve. And hypothetically, if Frank Costanza did endorse such a history, what mechanism might we consider to have developed or to have influenced what we observed in the understudy? How does one get from an event in one's past to social anxiety disorder versus specific phobia,
Avoidance behavior.
right? And again, continue. So,
Like a stress disorder type. Is that what you're getting at?
well, yeah, I mean, how about some behavioral theory? Yeah, I mean, there's probably some form of operant conditioning in play here, right? So there may have been an event, it may have been a precipitant, but the perpetuating factors are likely going to be found and therefore discussed within the context of an operant conditioning paradigm, right? Reinforcement paradigms as well as punishment paradigms. And that's something I think that the clinician would have to tease out. And similarly, when somebody actually, and again, we're going to connect this back to what we previously discussed, specifically with avoidant personality disorder. I don't think it's any stretch to have to remember for next week's shelf exam, for example, that the defense mechanism for that personality disorder is avoidance. And when a person avoids a situation, if I don't put myself out there, I won't get hurt. Well, that's true. So when their friends do call or they are invited out to a person's house where their tradition or their culture requires you're removing your shoes when you enter their home, you avoid that, you're not going to get hurt, you're not going to get embarrassed. And it's true. You miss out on those festivities, you missed out on the event, but you didn't get hurt. So the avoidance behavior is reinforced and therefore strengthened. Right. So that's a reinforcement paradigm that promotes and perpetuates the avoidance behavior, whether it's in the context of social anxiety disorder, specific phobia, or even the avoidant personality disorder. Right. Other observations about Frank? About 5 or 10 minutes left. Any other characters you want to discuss from the understudy?
Well, I think
This was interesting.
Was that?
Jen. I say Jenny's. I don't know if I'm
Yeah.
saying
The other.
the other. The other. Yes, she was a mess.
What's going on there?
Like I feel like she definitely has some. I don't know if I would call it like histrionic traits or just like dramaticism, but she cries all the time for everything. I dropped my hot dog. It's like the saddest thing ever. Like even when she was on stage and her like niece the boots weren't right, and she starts freaking out wanting them to get, like, she's just. And it seems like she's doing it for attention, but then it also feels like she truly, like, inside believes like that is an appropriate reaction for her to have to seemingly unimportant things, but for her, it's so important that she just breaks down when when it happens to her.
Yeah. So,
But and I think that Kevin made a really good point in that, in that, like, she is dramatic or like responsive all the time, which as an actor or actress, I think that probably started in maybe as something that she was trained to do, and then became maladaptive as it trickled out of her professional career into her personal life.
mhm. Yeah, it would be interesting if we could write a couple of episodes for Larry David about a prequel to this character and what that might look like. Yeah.
My first instinct was also histrionic, and I definitely think that cluster B is the source of it, but I think that also it's important to consider the differential borderline personality disorder as well, because they can often act kind of similarly, and it's not until you tease out some of like the other really like situational aspects and social aspects of the individual that you can like kind of parse the two apart.
Yeah.
They seem like really different on like the surface, and then you go a little bit lower, and then they seem really similar, and then I feel like you go lower and then distinguish them.
I think there might not be like enough of these, because I maybe what it's like, there's a crime and something, and you just come there, or is it just like, do you want the eye down here, or is it like, you want your part, or like, what does you want to do, it's a common. That would be, but.
So what motivates the crying, or again, what might reinforce the crying to be or perpetuating that behavior?
She does it when she's not like the center of attention, because then she gets that telegram when her grandma dies, and there's like no emotion, no caring. So like, it's not that I think she herself as like a person is overly just like dramatic and has a lot of emotions. It's a very much an attention seeking, because she does it at times when like she's kind of being forgotten about, or like, the actual, I forget the name of the actual actress that was there, Bette Midler. When she comes, then she has like starts to cry, or I definitely think it's more attention seeking, because then, if her grandma had died, that would have been a big blow up too, if it was kind of just maybe more histrionic.
Another point also, you were mentioning about acting that out into, but another possibility is, if you know the center of attention is kind of where what she wants, then being an actress is like the easiest way.
Which came first, the chicken or the egg?
Yeah.
Yeah, but and I was going to make it more personal for this table, and that is, can you name another profession in which, because of what you have to do, proverbially between 9 and 5, trickles into your personal life? And I'll give you a hint: we usually wear white coats and certainly have characteristic, quote unquote, personality traits, albeit probably from cluster C. But then again, most people with those types of traits, whether we call it type A personality or the obsessive compulsive personality, you can label it anything you want, tend to go into the medical field, right? So I don't want anybody raising their hand, but it's very similar. One of the things, couple of comments. One, the investigation as to whether these traits persist and are pervasive in other social settings is exactly what the clinician needs to do. So that's a great pickup there. In addition to that, I love the idea of, again, chicken versus egg, having to consider whether or not what she has been taught to do has resulted in a personality change, because it's given very, very little discussion in the clinical field. We're all taught that personalities are enduring characteristics, enduring traits that begin to develop in childhood and are crystallized by late adolescence, early adulthood. And that's not always the case, right? We can actually get a job that teaches us how to behave and changes who we are. Even though we don't think of personality development in that way, those cases have come up. and they're probably much more prevalent than we actually recognize. So it will be a chicken and the egg discussion, and we do need to watch the prequel. And any clinician would ask about their developmental history and to see which does come first, but I don't think we should dismiss the idea that there were no such traits up until the time where she became an actress, and what she was taught since has quote unquote changed who she is.
There's also like probably like a heuristic aspect to it of somebody who maybe is diagnosed with a personality disorder when they're in their mid-20s. And then you go retroactively and examine their past and talk to them about their past, and then you start to like find things because you're looking for them.
Mhm.
Whereas in somebody who has never been diagnosed with a personality trait, you could find those exact things if you were to look for them. You know, and it's just like, okay, how much is this just not really like actually their personality trait when they were below the age of 18?
Right.
I also think like even the way that when you said like she was an actress, like that's how we define ourselves a lot of the time is the profession. You become what you say you are. So that was just one that came into my brain. Like if she thinks of herself, if her identity is that she is an actress, then this is in line with her identity. She would be exactly who she is.
It's a great point, especially for this culture. All right, we're gonna end it there. We're 1 minute to the bottom of the hour. Log off and we'll log back on for our morning rounds. Thank you.